whitinu whiti ora mauke aro pārora tā tumatu mari ruhure poku tā kiri u himai te wairo kero tuko tapu mangan te upoka pia kai tau iwi ki tā wawa ki te wananga rua tau. Kati ko te huru, kati ko te hākoti ki te marakari ruru mahiti e tanga ngai ki te kiri tanga ngai tumatu e tanga i ngā wiru mau tiru ki te paupuna nuku e ke kai ngā roko rongo mai pa tā irangi he ke tua. He ke ki rotana te kake a tāne ki a kurangi e. Kia ora everybody. My name is Timoti Pahi. I'm the last Umu Takarangi, warrior priest of Te Whare Ahuru Rongo Mamau. I descend from Ngati Rereahu, which is a tribe of Maori, the native people of New Zealand. I was born into a tribe called Ngati Rereahu, which is a tribe of traditional Maori healers. And we have a long lineage of healing right from first time Maori set foot into New Zealand. And so I was raised in that legacy. And it was through that I had a traditional Maori healing clinic, and I met my teacher, Hohepa Delamere, who was from Te Whanau Apanui, a very famous healer in his own right. And he came to me for healing, and I helped him. And then from then on, he took me under his wing, and he taught me rongo mamau, which is a traditional Maori unarmed healing art, which was used for centuries in pre-European times in terms of being able to fight unarmed against warriors with weapons. And it was used on the battlefield, but it was also used in forms of conflict resolution, where to settle a dispute over a weapon would open up a repercussion of utu, or revenge, which could start wars. So rongo was a way in which you could deal with conflict resolution. But at a much deeper spiritual level, it was a form of body prayer, and that each movement was given to for art by different gods or atua. And just a bit of history of it, where it comes from in our stories, our traditional stories, our purako, was when the earth was created, the rangi, the sky and the earth were so close together that the children that were given birth, all the gods and goddesses of the world, the goddess of the sky, of the wind, of trees, they couldn't move. So some of the children decided to separate the sky from the earth. And as they did that, the sun shone into the world and gave light. And some of the children disputed that and had a problem with it. So a huge war started between the gods. The god of wind, who was so close to his father, was terribly upset about it. And so he started a war with the god of death against all the other children. And they had terrible weapons of destruction. And so one god, the god of healing, Rongo, saw this happening, and he said, this is going to kill all the atua, all the gods themselves will die. So he went to his highest brother, god of the stars, and he asked for a solution. He said, how will I be able to stop this fighting? And he said, I will give you 70 moves to disarm the weapons. And then once you've beaten each of your brothers, ask them for 70 moves that they will give to you. And then you will use this art to maintain a congregation of energy so that no one starts to kill each other anymore. So Rongo, the god of healing, he took these moves and he challenged his brother, the god of wind, god of all storms and tornadoes, and he easily defeated him using these moves. And then after he said, you now give me 70 moves of your realm. So Tawhiri Mate, the god of the wind, gave all the moves in the grappling art, where you lift the opponent off the ground, spin him around, throw him back to the ground. He went then to the god of the ocean, defeated him, and Tangaroa, the god of the ocean, gave all the rolling moves and the rolling sweeps, like crashing waves upon the shore. And he did this to all the other gods. The god of vine gave all the arm locks and twisting around the body like vines wrapping around a tree. And he did this into the 70 atua, had given 70 moves. Then he collected all these moves together, and he called it Rongo Mamau Tora Nai Te Ngā Atua, or the healing grappling art of the congregation of the gods. And it was a way that they could maintain their balance without hurting each other. And it was used for centuries, and it was used on the battlefield when you would fight against the opponent and you lost your weapon, or you would have great warriors who would go in without weapons and defeat the warriors. You've seen Maori warriors very good at weaponry, and so our art was the ones that taught them how to disarm. And so my teacher was the last Amorangi, the high priest of that priesthood, and it was a centuries-old priesthood that was passed down through his great-grandfather. And I was his only student, so he passed it down to me, and he gave me the responsibility of trying to bring it back into the world of light. Because in this country from 1907, it became illegal to practice arts like this that had a healing concept. It was a thing called Tohunga Suppression Act, where any of these arts, these healing arts, were made illegal. And that was only repealed in 1969. And so all my teachers were very, had to learn underground. And it had a benefit in some ways because it kept all the knowledge really pure. And it wasn't influenced by other arts, and it was only ever taught by father to son or within your iwi, your tribe. And so I was passed that down, and it was because of my healing background. So it is a balance of the healing art and the martial art that is something that was practiced in the old days. So that's just a bit of background about stuff.
Wow, Timothy, that's extraordinary. You know, it's an art that comes from the gods, sourced in healing, has a very strong, intense, comprehensive martial dimension, which covers, from what you're sharing, many, many bases of martial hand-to-hand combat warfare. And at the same time, can you share more about the healing capacity of this? And how does that work, please?
Well, the healing aspect was looking at, we believe we live in a world of a family of gods. So we look at it, everything, and in the context of where things belong. So we would not look at, for example, if a child had a problem, say sleeping, had insomnia, we wouldn't say that there's something was wrong with the child. Would say that the gods of the stars are calling that child, and in the pre-European days, they would take that child, put them on the mountain, and they would learn all about the navigation of the stars. So the so-called problem that we see now in these days, we call it, we pathologize them. In those days, they were actually gifts. You just had to find the right context. So that child would learn all about the navigation. If he was a so-called normal child, he'd be on the mountain learning about the stars and he'd fall asleep. So the fact that he had insomnia was actually a good thing. And it would go like that throughout all the children. So when we were young, in the old days, they would take a child and they would, all about 7 years old, that all the children of the village would be taken to different places and to look for what was called the taupuhi, or your special gift, your connection to the gods. And so some children would be taken to a lake or to a river when it was quite cold, and they were told, dive in. And then the experts would watch, and the one out of, say, 30 kids, maybe 1 or 2 would dive straight into the water. And the rest might go in a little at a time, so wouldn't want to go in at all. So he would take the ones that dive straight in, and they will learn all about Tangaroa, the god of the ocean, all about Hinemoana, the goddess of the ocean, all about how to fish and how to use the ocean and that. And then they would take the rest of the kids into another place, like maybe a muddy garden, and they would say, find some worms, get some worms, and they would watch again. The ones that dived into it and they were having fun, they would take them and they would teach them all about cultivation, about rongo and how to plant kumara and how to be cultivators. And they would do that all throughout the different world. And they would find that place where the aro or the context matched the ao or the world. And so that wasn't seen as there's something wrong if there was a problem. They were seeing that there was an incompatibility of context. And so they would change the context.
That's incredible. That turns education upside down, and it makes any type of what we consider some type of fault into an opportunity, into an actual expression of a gift. This is so. That's amazing. Is this still lived? Like how do you share this? Do you have students? Are they learning these principles?
Yeah, I have students. My teacher and I also used to teach it in some of the Maori high schools around the country, but it's more now become like something that you teach through to people, which they can teach on and pass it on. And so it's more about having the old concepts brought back to life in a way that they can be practical. So we would have, for example, stories about one of my ancestors who was born with crooked feet. And because of his crooked feet, when all the other kids were going outside and playing, he had to sit by the elders and he couldn't play. And so he sat and he learned everything. And he became the wisest man in the village. And he used to say, my knowledge comes through my crooked feet. And so taking those concepts and finding where is that kid going to fit perfectly into a situation where their so-called issues are actually resources. And when you can start framing that way, you see where all our kids have a huge potential of being good at things, instead of immediately putting them into, oh, you don't fit into this category, so there's something wrong with you. We have to find more categories. And so if you can do that and start thinking like that, that's more taking that philosophy of the old way around, and that there was nothing wasted in nature. everything fitted into nature. And it's just finding that part of nature in which that context and that world are compatible.
Wow, astounding. This is the perfect wisdom for today, with all the ails that we have on our planet, micro, in our small, in our own homes, in our towns, in our whole societies, right, worldwide, is a deep disconnect between ourselves and the way of nature, the laws of. Can you share more about the laws of nature from your traditions?
Well, in our laws of nature, we have two concepts, which is tapu and noa. Tapu are the things that are very sacred, and noa are the things that are very common. And we go through different stages of that throughout our lives. And every day, like getting prepared for something, you go through a stage of noa where you're just normal. And then say if you're going into a meeting at work or something, you reach into a stage of tapu. And it's being able to manifest that and be able to develop that and go from one stage to another. You can't stay tapu your whole life, or you will never be able to eat and just do normal things. And to achieve good things, you have to go through states of tapu. And so those concepts are utilized in things of learning. So we go through all these different stages in our life. Just like in nature, when we enter into a forest, we have to enter in the way that joins us into the forest, other than changing the forest. So when we walk into a forest, we walk 12 feet and then we stop and then we let the birds hear us. And then we breathe with the breath of the forest, and then we walk another 12 steps and stop. And by the time we've entered into the forest, we'll know we've done it in the correct way because the birds will still be singing. If we go into a forest and the birds will stop making sound, we've put our energy over the top of that forest. And so it's the same thing, principles, when you're learning something. You have to be able to be humble enough to be able to walk in very slowly and gently and not actually change that atmosphere of the place that you're going in to learn. So some of the representatives of that would be, in the old days, some of the old wharewana, when we were taught traditional healing, the doors were only a couple of feet high. So you had to go on your hands and knees to get into the house of learning. So it was showing you had to be humble to learn. You wouldn't walk fully erect. You would go down on your hands and knees and you would call in, because that would show that your state of learning has to have a humility to it. So a lot of our culture was based on things like symbologies and stuff. For example, Maori culture used to be a matriarchal culture. And it wasn't until the Europeans came in, they said, oh, well, that's actually not a good way to be. And they tried to change a lot of the concepts of which we followed. But I was always taught, my teachers always taught me that in our culture, the women had the tuakanatanga, or they were the elders in terms of being the firstborn, in terms of having that power to create life. And so the men in traditional society were important, but it was vital to have the women, because without the women, the people wouldn't live. And so a lot of our customs that we had were around protecting women, because we were very into tribal warfare-based people. A lot of our culture would be the men protected the women, and the men would stand up and they would speak. And it would be, they were protecting the women from any sort of negative effect of when you meet another tribe. So when the European people saw this, they tended to judge it and say, oh, the women aren't allowed to speak. But that wasn't actually true. It was more that they were so precious, they were taken care of. And the first voice you would ever hear whenever you went on to marae was the singing of the woman. She would do a thing called a karanga. And that was the first voice. And it's a symbol of the first voice of when a woman screams when she's giving childbirth. And that is some of the concepts that had been changed by the European kind of connection into our Maori culture. So we're trying to bring back some of the old traditional ways of really looking at nature and where does nature teach us, because it's all in nature.
Beautiful, Timoti. Very beautiful. When you share, I can, through these teachings, it's so easy to drop into the connection with it. It's laid out so clearly. Very, very, very absorbable.
Yeah.
My friend, what do you see, what do you see in your students? What do you see in the people around you as some of the things that are limiting us most in terms of feeling like we can be of strength, be of purpose, be of good use in this time?
I think we have this concept in Maori, it's called wānanga, which means the energy that belongs to this moment. And it's this moment. And so it is used in battle. When we're on battlefield and we were fighting, we have no other time than that exact moment, that now, and then that now, and then that now. And so each new now is that moment. That's all we have. When we focus on the other times that we have no control of, the past or the future, when we lose our centrality, our neutral perspective. And so the rongo is the art of reciprocity, and to find reciprocity, you must have neutrality. And so the neutrality is that if you give me love, I will return love to you. But if you give me negatives, I will return that back to you as well. And the only way I can do this is be neutral in my mind and to be focusing on what I'm in control of at this moment in time. What I see a lot of times people having problems is they're thinking about the future or the past. They're not centered in neutrality and they're not centered in the moment. And once you can bring that back into the moment of what you're actually doing right now as you take each breath in, that breath is holding that neutrality. And when you do that, then you start finding your wānanga, so you start finding your connections. And you start breathing, you start connecting back to your ancestors, because our breath is also something that is sacred to us. To us, we do not own this breath. It is something that's passed down to us from our ancestors that we will pass down to our descendants. And so we must protect the breath and we must find it sacred. And to do that, we have to be aware of each breath that we have in some form. And we have to focus on the now, the wānanga. So that moment that we have. What I see people being disconnected is from when they're pushing themselves ahead into the future or focusing on the past. So we teach that in our art to always think about right now, the wānanga. Hope that answers your question.
You know, I've been going through this strong power has been coming through that's been like, okay, it's time now to align forces, bring wisdom into the seat of power, not greed, not just people who have great wealth or great power, not people who just only have great intelligence, that's all valuable, but those who have wisdom as the core of their being. Wisdom meaning something that's come from living a lot of life, going through many opposites, going through wins, losses, failures, learning from them. And tell us about what wisdom is and how it was, please, is it, you know, how it was revered, what's our relationship with that eternal essence, that eternal knowing?
Well, for us, we have a lot of concepts that relate wisdom to things like a tree. So a tree, it must be started as a seed. So all knowledge starts as something very small. And then it must be, just like as a seed is grown, it must be put into the right environment for it to germinate. And some wisdom needs scarification and needs to be burnt, and it has to find that connection. Some needs the right environment, some right water, that sort of thing. So it has to have the right environment for knowledge to learn. And so we have different stages through learning, and it's looked at as being it's only relative when it's relevant, and it's only real knowledge when it's utilized and it's resourced. Other than that, it's information. But once it becomes utilized and practiced, then you're integrating that knowledge into life. So it's looked at as being strands of a woven mat. And once you've actually woven it together with all the other strands, then you can use it as a resource. Other than that, we were taught many different things that in our stories where the different words were a way of encapsulating the different knowledges. So, for example, we have stories about Maui. I don't know if you know about Maui. And Maui was he was like a demigod of Maori, and he was a great kind of archetype about how you learn things. And he was very curious, and he found he would try things if he wanted to know where fire came from. And so no one would tell him. So he went out and put all the fires out. And then everyone was freezing cold, and they said, "You little bugger, you better go get some more fire." He goes, "Okay, I'll go get it. Where do I get it?" And so that's what he did. But Ma means pure and intention of pure innocence, and Ui means to ask questions. So the Maui concept is to always ask questions, to find out things, be curious. The mātou, which means knowledge, that's a hook. That's how you can actually find that knowledge and use it in something beneficial. So he's the one that a lot of our stories talk about. The way that you would learn knowledge is through being curious and finding things, and then actually how you could use that knowledge for the benefit of people. So a lot of our culture was always how it actually helped other people. So a chief was only the richest person by how much he could give away, not about how much they had. So the chief was considered the richest person. If he gave away all the things, he was actually kind of a pathway of riches. And that's how you would judge a person, by their richness, of how much they could give away and how much you could help other people. And so a lot of chiefs, when they were trying to help people, what they would do is they would be very humble, and they would be trying to build other people up. And then the knowledge and the mana, the power, would come back to them in that way. So it was always about what use you had in your society. And so some of those principles were very different than we would have in this Western world. So you were, being an individual in the pre-European Maori days was not a good thing. You had to understand that everything that you did and said was actually had a direct relationship and response to everyone around you. So you had to think about that, and just going down and getting water from the creek, you had to think about, would there be people around you that could pose danger to you? You had to be aware of every word that you said so you didn't offend someone. You had to be thoughtful of different stuff that you had to do. So you were always living in a systemic world. And it's the same thing with nature. The things that you did, you would not go into and overfish a certain kind of fish, because then after a while you would have no more of that fish. So you had to see everything that you did was like dropping a stone into a pond, and the ripples that you would ripple out to that pond would eventually come back to you. And so that's how you had to live your life in a systemic world, which Māori were.
Which is where we are, which we've always been in.
That's right.
Timoti, I wish everyone could learn what you've just shared, like in the world. I wish it goes beyond New Zealand, and your students are very, blessed to have you to be able to share these ancient ways. I'm so glad your teacher gave you so much and you absorbed it. I wanted to ask you, some of the folks here, we've been into martial arts, but a lot of folks have no idea what martial arts are, what it means, its value. And some people, especially in the spiritual path, they believe that things of a martial nature are negative or are attracting negative aspects to you. But, we have our own experiences. I'd love to hear your experience on how martial arts relates to, and practicing the path of the warrior relates to life and consciousness.
Well, the martial art I practiced, Rungo Mamo, was based on love. And it was Rungo's love for his brothers to stop them from killing each other. And so that was a positive. And that was taught to us that if you are protecting and keeping someone safe, even if it's yourself, that comes from love. And then that is a positive art. And so you're not trying to just hurt people for the sake of hurting people or taking what they want. You're actually protecting it with love, and that's much more powerful. And it's also out of reciprocity, in that when we would fight, we would use that energy that the person is bringing us, and we would join with that energy and put it back onto them. So it wouldn't be like our intention is to hurt them, but we would also not put it on ourselves, and we would put it back onto that person. So a lot of our moves are in nature. So as the wind blows the tree bends back into the wind. And so we would use all those things that you see in nature, the way the waves crash down, and the way that the tree has its roots into the earth, and those sort of things. We would use those principles of nature. And so the concept of harm and trying to hurt someone wasn't in our art. There were martial arts that did do that were just about basically warrior arts, but our art was about actually how you could use that positive intention of reciprocity. And so that was being a healer first. That was something that it was very compatible with us. So as we were healing, we were learning about the martial arts too. We learned all about the physiology of the body and biology, and we learned all how the energy flows through the body, things like massage and pressure point and breathing and all those sorts of things were as the healing art. And then as we started moving into the martial art, it was just totally compatible with it. It was just the other side of the coin. And it's understanding that energy, it flows, and there's no empty energy. Energy doesn't die; it just transforms. And so, using those principles in a martial way, is a person's strike will just come back onto them. And so, it's that concept of being linked into the nature and seeing that the way a tree grows or the way that the wind blows, and utilizing that in your movements. And so when we would do that, we would practice these movements over and over again, we would start to change ourselves to be very like those elements in which we were trying to connect to. So the movements of the waves, the movements of the wind, the movements of the lightning, or different elements. And so as we were doing that, we were actually in a form of body prayer to those elements, and it was connecting us into a higher realm. So our sort of frequencies would go higher and higher, and it became a way of a spiritual connection for us as well. So that spiritual aspect was a very big part of it. It wasn't just about fighting; it was about connecting into that higher frequency building part of our art.
Beautiful, thank you. What's there in your heart, brother, to share with us?
Oh, it's just an honor to be here, and I think it's my actually teacher foresaw all this change, and he had a lot to talk about was the magnetic change in the world and how things were going to be affected by that. And he foresaw it 20 years ago. He said there was be a huge change in 2020, and so you know, it's not a coincidence to me when I see that in April that the North Pole had shifted from Canada to Siberia. And so there are things that are happening around the elements and around nature that we are picking up on. And it might be at a very subconscious level that we're picking these things up, but the whole world is changing, and the Atuas themselves, the gods, are moving, and we have no choice then to feel this. And more sensitive people are picking it up a lot more. And I think when we start bringing ourselves out of the control thing and thinking that we have a control aspect to it, or worrying about the future and just coming back to the now and connecting into nature, then it makes it a whole lot more easier for us to understand it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You know, if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat box. And let me just take a look if there is any. If anyone is watching and you have any questions, feel free to put them in here. Center in neutrality in the moment. You know, I'd like you to share, when I first met you, you shared deeply about that, centered in neutrality. You know, this is an ancient Taoist concept also. The idea of being in equanimity, not overly being attached to, not putting too much importance on too many things. If you do, the tendency is when things aren't going right with the things that you've put importance on, then it causes all types of inner stress, turmoil, and so forth. So that when we are having some type of really strong inner distress, we can search for within where we attributed too much importance, start to denature, start to let go of all those things that we have made way too important, too much attachments on. And you know, there's a release of that energy that happens, and our choices become empowered. We start to feel more peaceful, and we become flow state. We don't go into flow state, we become it. I'd love to hear your experience of this, please.
Neutrality. Yeah, that's very similar to how we were taught, in that just losing yourself in the energy, and losing your kind of ego, I guess you could say, and just focusing on being neutral and really working for that neutrality of not putting judgments on things and situations. If you looked at it in a martial application, if a person was to try to hit you with a stick, you hear, you are absorbing that movement, and what you actually try and do is take their perspective on it. You try to do this thing we call whakaata, where you actually see that person's energy from their perspective. And so you join your energy to them, and so that your movements actually become part of their movement. And so you're actually becoming in their, and you enter into them, we call uru, in which you enter into their way of thinking about things. And then you just, once you do that, you have the ability to put it back to them. And so that only comes when you lose yourself and you enter into the other person. And then you can actually start seeing different things, and you can start feeling the energy movement. And you only can do that if you lose yourself, if you stop thinking about yourself and you open yourself to be neutral. And when you do that, same thing with healing. We heal someone, we have to lose ourselves. And by doing that, you gain that connection to anything around you. And same thing we practice by going into nature and doing that, connecting into the forest, by sitting in the forest for a long time, trying to lose yourself and absorb it into the forest or into the ocean or on a mountain and with the wind blowing by you, and trying to absorb into that neutrality. And then you can connect to the different elements around you. And that's a practice that we try to manifest and build that ability to actually, at will, be able to go into a neutral point in our lives.
This particular artistry, inner alchemy, inner practice, I think is so essential at this time. You know, there's so much information bombarding us from every different source. Much of it is evoking our emotions, causing us to be unstable, evoking fear, panic, closure, apathy, all different types of responses that bring us out of our center.
Yeah.
Can you share more about this particular time right now that we're in? We've got COVID, we've got you know, a new civil rights movement that's happening, Black Lives Matter. We've got all these very pertinent and powerful issues. We've got the condition of the planet. There's a lot of things that are in seeming fire and flames and perhaps uncertainty in the world for many of us. It's a good approach to this. How can we remain in that power?
I can only personally say from my perspective, but all I do is I just see how little I am. If I compare myself to the sky or to the ocean or to the wind, I see how insignificant I am, and I take myself small as I can. And I understand that at one level, everything is the same. We're all energy. And it just, we think that there's an illusion of separation that we're taught from very young age. If you see a child reaches for something and think they can grab it, but it might be many feet away from it because it doesn't see that separation. We have to teach that. That's my hand and that's that chair. And so we learn separation. Whereas once in our school, in our training, is to try to remember that connection. And when you see everything as connection and you see everything as energy, then there's no good or bad. There's just these movements of energy and this transformation that goes from one thing to another. And in that, there's that centrality of understanding that everything is connected. And it's that illusion of separation that there's this thing is different than that, or that thing is bad, or that thing is good. And once you start going down that pathway of judging things, then you start seeing the separation. So what we try to do is manifest that stuff in ourselves around seeing everything is connected at that lower level, or that base level, that energy level. Everything is connected. We are energy within an ocean of energy. And when we start to see that, then we start feeling calm, because everything is connected and there's no separation of things other than what we create ourselves.
Thank you. Brother, any last shares before we wrap up today?
I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of the thoughts of my ancestors and my teachers, and it's just an honor to be able to connect with people of the same ilk, of the same pathway. And I think it's really amazing to be able to meet people in that same sort of area, and I think it's a real honor to be able to share this with all of you.
It's wonderful having you. I feel I want to listen to this share over and over and over again. There's so much richness in this. One of your in a paragraph, it's just packed with great unpacking to do, and contemplations and practices for lifetime. So I'm very honored. I'm very grateful for you sharing your ways, this great wisdom that's you're obviously embodying. And I look forward to strengthening our friendship and our allyship in the room. And thank you so much, friends, family, warrior sages. And let's, listening is one thing, it's time for us to be able to absorb these wisdoms know that they're living within us. If there's anything that is touching you in any of this, it means that there's already that capacity, that resonance already within yourself to nurture, to fulfill, to feed, and now to act from. And the whole world, Mother Nature herself, is really calling us to act even more fully from this place of, as you said, neutrality. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew.